Let's make a statue. The miniature we'll be using is a Grim Reaper statue from Heya Miniatures that I bought years and years ago. I'll leave a link in the description. Before we move on, I'll give it a bath in some soapy water. The miniature is made of resin. Resin miniatures usually have some leftover mold release on them, typically some sort of oil, to make sure that the resin doesn't stick to the mold. And we need to remove that before we paint the model, because if we don't, the paint might not stick properly. I'll go over the model with a stiff brush. You can use a toothbrush or whatever you have to hand. This is one of those times where it pays to be thorough. On more than one occasion I have had primers flake off because I didn't clean the model properly. And by the way, you don't need to do this with plastic models. I went ahead and removed the plinth off camera. Now let's put the pieces together. Superglue is pretty much the only option you have when you're assembling resin miniatures. Here's a little trick for you. If you get too much super glue on the model, you can soak it up with the edge of a paper towel without the paper getting stuck to the model. While the glue is drying, let's see if we can find another plinth for the statue. Let's look in one of my boxes of potential. I do like both of these, but I think I like the taller one better. It has a lot more detail and a lot more surface area to add foliage to. To cover the hole on top of the pipe, I'm gonna use a 25mm MDF base, which will also act as a base for the statue. I'll start by adding some texture to the plinth. And I'll use this product called Rust Texture by Vallejo. It's pretty much the same thing as Typhus Corrosion from Games Workshop, but it's a little more coarse. I'll use a little water to dilute it a bit. I quite like it for terrain, not as much for miniatures. That's looking good to me, so we'll leave it to dry and then I'll take it outside and prime it. I've primed the plinth in a charcoal black and now I'll give it a dry brush of Vallejo Oily Steel. This is a nice and easy way of getting a dark metallic look in a few simple steps without having to use any washes. The plinth will be painted to look like rust, and to create some contrast, I'll paint the statue in a verdigris color to look like oxidized bronze. To make the rust effect, I'll use Dirty Down Rust. Just for fun, I'm gonna add a bit of water to see what happens. Dirty Down Rust is an alcohol-based rust effect that you can reactivate with water. I'll also add some undiluted rust effect straight out of the bottle to give it some variation. This is pretty much magic in a bottle, but unfortunately it costs about 4 times as much as a regular bottle of paint. And I think that looks good. Let's leave it to dry. I'll start by dry brushing the statue with Vallejo Bronze. For the verdigris on the statue, I'll use the oil paint Turquoise Lights by Uptoiling 502, and I might use some of this copper oxide blue to create some color variation. I'll just leave it on this cardboard for a couple of minutes to soak up the excess oil so the paint will dry faster. To create the verdigris effect, I'm gonna start by placing some dots of paint on top of the model, and then I'll drag them downwards with a clean brush, and we'll see how that looks. The good thing about oil paints is that they take a long time to dry, and you can pretty much remove them again if you don't like the result. I'm using some cheap synthetic brushes here so I don't ruin my good paint brushes. This looks quite good. For some color variation, I'm gonna try adding some of the copper oxide blue and do the same thing as before. Okay, that looks good to me. I'll repeat the process for the base of the statue on top of the plinth. To make sure they don't break apart, I'm gonna pin the statue to the plinth. I've already drilled a hole in the bottom of the statue and glued a piece of paper clip in the hole. Now I'm gonna make a hole in the plinth and put the pin in there. After the oil paint had some time to dry, I went outside and gave it a coat of matte varnish. Unfortunately, that also knocked back the rust effect quite a bit. The darker look might be a better contrast to the foliage we'll apply later, so I'll keep it as it is for now. I want to try some of this foliage that I bought from the German company Mini Natur a couple of years ago. I think I'll choose this light green one. I think that'll look the best with the colors we already have. This looks quite interesting. It's basically just some sort of fiber with some leaves stuck to it. It's quite tacky. It could be interesting to try to make it from scratch at some point. It does look really good though. I'll use superglue to add the foliage to the plinth. In hindsight, superglue might not have been the best idea, because I kept gluing the foliage to my fingers. Perhaps using a silicone tool might have worked better, or maybe I should have used a tacky glue instead of superglue. But in the end it worked out. There's a little bit of overhang here, so let's just trim that off. I'll just wait for the superglue to dry, then I'll go outside and give it another coat of matte varnish, because the superglue will look glossy when it dries. In the end I decided I wanted to reapply some of the rust effect, so we'll just do that now. Alright, let's let that dry and then it's time to see the final result. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.